Here's a question for you. How do you spy on someone in broad daylight without anyone ever suspecting you're there? The Central Intelligence Agency's answer, worked out over 5 real years in the 1960s, was don't send a person, send a cat. Not a nickname, not a code word for a spy, an actual, physical, living cat. Drop a comment with your guess. How much do you think the United States government spent trying to make that work? The problem the agency was chasing was a real one. Soviet officials stationed in Washington, D.C. had gotten smart about American surveillance. They stopped talking indoors, where a room could be bugged, and started holding sensitive conversations outside, on park benches, in open air, assuming nobody could plant a microphone close enough to matter. Engineers at the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology needed something that could sit a few feet from a bench for hours, completely unnoticed. Something with total permission to exist in that space. And almost nothing has more permission to loiter near a park bench, ignoring everyone, than a cat. So in 1961, the agency greenlit a project with a name that sounds like a joke, but was dead serious. Acoustic Kitty. Surgeons opened the animal up and installed a tiny microphone in its ear canal, threaded a radio transmitter into the base of its skull, and ran a thin wire antenna the entire length of its tail. A battery pack went into its chest cavity, wired in among its actual organs. Of every strange procedure the American taxpayer has ever unknowingly funded, this one has a real claim to first place. Former intelligence officer Victor Marchetti, who later spoke publicly about his time inside the agency, put the total cost of building this one cat at somewhere around $20 million for one animal that nobody could actually control. Because hardware, it turned out, was the easy part. A perfectly wired cat is worthless if it decides halfway through a mission that it would rather sit in a warm patch of sunlight. So handlers spent months on behavioral conditioning, trying to train the cat to walk toward a target and hold still on command, the same way you'd train a service animal. Anyone who has ever lived with a cat can already guess how that went. Dogs take orders. Cats take them under advisement, and frequently decline. According to later accounts of the program, an entire team, veterinarians, electrical engineers, and behavioral specialists, worked together for roughly 1.5 years just refining the surgery and the training regimen before anyone was confident enough to test it in the field. Picture that org chart for a second. A meeting room full of serious Cold War professionals, security clearances and all, whose actual job that week was arguing about how to make a cat sit still on command. Somewhere in Langley, there is presumably a memo, still partially classified, that contains the phrase, "Cat will not comply," typed in complete seriousness by a federal employee. But eventually, the team decided their cat was field ready. The target was 2 men talking near the Soviet embassy compound. The plan was simple on paper. Drive the cat close, open the door, let it stroll into position, and listen in from a safe distance. Which raises the stranger question hiding inside this whole story. What actually happens in the seconds after you release $20 million of surgically embedded espionage equipment onto a public sidewalk and just hope? According to the accounts that later became public, the team pulled up, opened the van door, and the cat stepped out onto the street. It was hit by a taxi almost immediately. Some versions say it happened within seconds. Others say the cat made it a little further first, then wandered into traffic anyway, chasing something only it could see. Either way, the mission that had consumed years of surgical and behavioral engineering ended on a curb, under a very ordinary yellow cab, before a single word of Soviet conversation was ever recorded. Robert Wallace, a former director of the CIA's own Office of Technical Service, later wrote about the program and confirmed that officials shut it down soon after. His summary of the agency's final conclusion amounted to roughly this: a cat cannot be relied upon to follow orders under field conditions. which is, frankly, information available for free to literally anyone who has ever tried to give a cat a bath. The story stayed buried for decades, one of thousands of Cold War projects the public was never meant to hear about, filed away somewhere between the merely secret and the deeply embarrassing. And Acoustic Kitty wasn't operating in isolation. The same agency in that same general era was running mind control research under the name MK Ultra, testing surveillance gear disguised as everyday objects, and pouring money into ideas that ranged from clever to borderline unhinged, all under the same broad umbrella of whatever might work against the Soviets. A wired-up cat was, in that context, almost a mundane Tuesday. Then, in 2001, the agency declassified a memo that referenced Acoustic Kitty by name as part of a much larger release of historical documents, and journalists finally connected the dots. Some details are genuinely contested. The $20 million figure comes mainly from Marchetti's memory, not an itemized CIA invoice, and no photograph of the surgically altered cat has ever surfaced publicly. A few historians suspect the story picked up embellishment as it got retold over the years, the way any good legend does. But the core of it, the declassified reference, the surgical modification, the months of training, the live test, is backed by the agency's own paperwork, not just campfire retelling. Which loops back to the bigger question this story keeps circling. If a plan this expensive and this strange made it all the way to a live field test before anyone official said no, how many other Cold War ideas got just as far and simply never got declassified for us to laugh at? Somewhere in a federal records facility, there may be a file on a pigeon, a dolphin, something with a code name nobody outside a small, cleared office has ever read aloud. We genuinely don't know. That's not a dramatic flourish. That's just where the paper trail runs out. If a story like this is exactly the kind of thing you come here for, subscribing genuinely helps more than you'd expect. Most people watching right now aren't subscribed yet, and it costs you nothing but a tap. So here's the takeaway. The same one, a very expensive cat, taught the Central Intelligence Agency the hard way. You can pour $20 million, years of surgery, and a small team of trained handlers into an engineering problem, but you cannot out-engineer free will in an animal that never agreed to the mission. The agency built a spy. The cat, given one chance at the open road, chose to just be a cat. And honestly, out of everything the Cold War produced, that might be the single most relatable outcome on record.